Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage. This is a new game in the Dungeons & Dragons board game system, a system that was first presented in Castle Ravenloft almost 10 years ago. So this system has been pretty successful. If I counted right, this should be the 6th game in that system. And if you play games as a hobby, you probably came across some of these games. If you are an undead magical creature and you spend the last decade slumbering in your sepulcher, this is a system for fantasy adventuring. It is completely cooperative. Players don't need a dungeon master, they work together against the game system, against automatized enemies that are controlled by simple but effective AIs. They explore in different areas and, well, doing different things. The game, each game in the system has different missions, and this one is no exception. You can play each mission, each scenario as a one-shot adventure, or you can play them in order as a campaign, and there is a system of progression, and there is an overarching narrative that will emerge. Here, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, in a certain sense, it is the archetypical Dungeons & Dragons situation. I learned to play Dungeons & Dragons from the Red Box edition, and if you remember, the intro adventure in that edition has you exploring a dungeon to try to capture an evil wizard. And so here, well, we're going against a Mad Mage. A mage, after all, is just like a wizard, just less cool. But the general idea being, this is like pure quintessential D&D, almost a vintage idea. Also, I wanted to play this game because I recently played another fantasy adventure game, Midara, that has a combination of board-based action and very long sections of text, pages and pages, pretty much the equivalent of chapters in books, telling you the story, introducing the scenarios that then you play on the board. For some of you, I'm sure that makes Midara the best fantasy game out there. To me, I just struggle with the balance between long sections of text. I want to play the board game. I can read long books, but when I am getting ready to play a board game, I'm happy with a shorter introduction, and then with the action, with the narrative emerging from gameplay. And since D&D board games excelled at doing that, at just giving you a sense of the atmosphere, and then the narrative will be emergent from gameplay itself, well, that's one of the reasons why I was excited to play Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Now, let me show you how the game works. Like all other games in this game system, here we have characters that are represented by a miniature that goes on the board, a main card with the stats and basic information about the character. The card is double-sided, representing first and second level. Of course, you start at the first. And then there is a set of smaller cards that will represent the abilities of the character. And since you can choose those characters, that is where you can customize your hero. Armor class is the stat that the enemies are trying to meet or exceed to inflict damage on you. Health points, that stat that when it goes down to 0, your hero dies or passes out. There are different interpretations here. In any case, it's bad. Speed, the number of spaces up to which your character can move with a move action. And surge value. The group cumulatively owns a number of healing surge tokens. When a character starts their turn at 0 health points, they spend one of the surge tokens of the group and they go back to the surge value, which is not necessarily the same for all characters. If it is the beginning of a turn, a player is down to 0 health points, would need to use a heal surge token and the group doesn't have any, then the group loses the game. So basically dying too often, having too many of your friends dying is the main way in which the game is lost. Here, as we were saying, you have the description of the kind of cards that you can use, the kind of powers. Say there will be one at-will power. At-will powers are basically your basic reliable attack that you can use every time. And suppose that for my basic attack, I decide to give Nayeli this one here, which I find, by the way, to be a great attack. And then I would have 2 utility powers and 1 daily powers. These are powers that, for the most part, after you use them, you need to flip them face down. That means you cannot use them again. Usually, well, until they are flipped back face up, but you may not be able to find effects that flip them face up. So when you turn this one of these powers face down by using it, you need to understand that chances are that you may not be able to use it again for the rest of the game. So this is how you customize your hero with the powers, kind of like so. Then we get to the board. We don't know everything that is in the dungeon that we're exploring at the beginning of the game. The dungeon is modular. It will be built by using terrain tiles in this nice stack here. When players end their movement phase next to an unexplored edge, then you will draw a tile from the top of that deck and you will populate it accordingly. But for example, here you will place a monster. But before we get there, during your turn, when it is your turn to activate your hero, first you can do two things. You can move and then take an action, or take an action and then move. Movement is what we're saying. You move up to your full movement allowance, and you can move diagonally. You have to stop if you move next to an unexplored edge. Other actions can be to try to disarm a trap. When the board tells you to place traps on a tile, like that would be that symbol, then you draw tiles from a randomizing cup without looking at them, and you place them there. If you're adjacent to one of those trap tokens, then you usually have 50% chance of disarming it, unless there are other effects. You spend your action to try to disarm a trap, roll a die. If you roll 1 to 10, you trigger it because you failed to disarm it, and so you simply have to flip it face up and resolve its effect. Otherwise, if you rolled 11 to 20, the trap is disarmed and removed. And of course, another big action is to attack. You need to be adjacent to an enemy. Then you choose the power that you will use for the attack. Say, suppose I use this one. You roll a d20, apply the modifier, and if your result is equal to or higher than the armor value of the target, then you score a hit and you inflict the number of damage points indicated there. And so, as you can see, different characters, different enemies will have their own cards with action, with armor class, health points, their own attack, and then a little bit of an AI that tells you what happens when they activate. After you're done with your turn, remember, move and attack, or attack and move, or move twice. You can use your action to move again. It is time to go to the exploration phase. That is when, if you are next to an unexplored edge, you place a tile there and you populate it. You populate it with traps, if that is the symbol. You populate it with monsters, if that is the symbol. To populate with a monster, you simply draw a card from the monster deck, and then you place that card in front of you. Suppose this one, this Intellect Devourer, this little adorable little mini brain that doesn't do much. Mainly it stuns you, but if it stuns you again when you're already stunned, then actually it gives massive damage. So very harmless or very dangerous. It doesn't do a lot of things in between. There may be also symbols that let you place treasures on the board. There may be ambush symbols that per se don't do anything, like in this case here. These are just empty unless there is a game effect that tells you that something happens there. Now, after the exploration phase, so we may place down a new tile if a hero is next to an unexplored edge, and then we populate it. Next, we have the monster phase, the villain phase, in which first we need to draw an encounter card. These are usually bad. If either we did not explore, so we did not add a new tile, or we added a tile with a black triangle. So this is the mechanism that forces you to keep moving, otherwise negative, bad stuff, bad encounters will keep piling up on your heroes, and this is not good. Environment or negative effects, usually negative effects that may that will last until another environment is played, and so on and so forth. Also important thing, when we're killing monsters, after you kill a monster, you take the trophy card and you put it in a trophy pile, and when you need to draw an encounter card, you can choose to annul it by spending 5 experience points. So, we said we are at the villain phase. During the villain phase, first you draw an encounter card, possibly. Then you activate a villain if there is one in play. Those would be the big bosses. And then you activate all of the monsters for which you have a card in front of you. So I explored that one, I put that on the board, I put this card in front of me. Now it's my villain phase because it's during my turn, and I need to activate my monster, for which you simply read the tactic sections from top to bottom, activating and simply doing whatever it is that applies to the monster. Other important thing, when you kill a monster, you get to draw a treasure. Yes, even small little laughable monsters such as that one will generate treasures, which feels like, oh, almost like a freebie. Then other times you have to kill the zombie beholder, and that is not nearly as fun, but you still get a treasure for that. So the idea is this: you keep exploring, going around, trying to complete the mission. The game is scenario based, so each scenario has different victory conditions. The defeat condition is usually the same one, although you may have some special ones, and you continue like this until the players complete the scenario and meet the victory conditions, or they lose the game. Now, after we covered the general mechanics of the system, a closer look at some of the unique and new elements that you find in this game. First, the heroes. You already saw some of these, but here we have the human paladin that is good at taking bullets, or metaphorical bullets, for her friends. The fighter that allows the other character to regain health and gain advantage. Yeah, it's interesting. It's the fighters and the paladin that worry about other people's health. The cleric, that usually we think has a lot of healing power, can do some of that, but mainly is good at killing undead people and to prevent people from dying, as you can see in this effect here, but not so much at healing people per se. Then we have a sorcerer that can also move in conjunction with attacking, get some extra movement abilities, and the gnome that is good at disarming traps and also moving after disarming certain traps. So that's good, that's neat. As for the miniatures that represent these heroes, here they are. These are our 5 heroes. The gnome is, well, I guess it's in scale because that's really small miniature. Let's see the camera. Yeah, the camera struggles to pick up that level of small detail. Here we have the sorcerer. He looks like he's playing with pizza dough, but trust me, that's magic energy instead. Although pizza is magic, so there's that. The paladin sword got a little bit bent, and that's life. And then we have the cleric and the fighter. The cleric and the fighter. As for the monsters, we got a nice array of monsters that are slightly, I believe, on average, more horrific than previous monsters. You don't have a lot of traditional goblins and stuff like that. There's usually more of a horror element, I find. Oops, moving too fast here. So we had the shadow, and you can see how gothic and scary that is. You know that the designers are trying to scare you when they don't even give you regular beholders, but they give you modified beholders, zombie beholders, as you can behold there. Then we already saw the little intellect devourer. There's the little frogman here that jumps around, hits and jumps away, super mega annoying. We got some thugs. We have a hag with very long arms, as you can see here. We have the flying sword, one of the strangest looking miniatures I've ever seen in any D&D board games. A giant construct scorpion there. We got 2 veterans, very similar, but one has 2 swords and the other one doesn't. And then we have some unique characters here that I'm not gonna tell you too much about because I don't want to give you spoilers about things that you may discover later in the campaign. Still, very impressive miniatures, and yes, especially when it comes to some of these unique characters. I don't think it's a spoiler to show them to you because you will see them as you open the box, but when they appear and what they do, that will be up to you to find that out. Nice, huh? This game is good. It's good like its brothers or sisters, I don't know, cousins, relatives, the previous games that came out in the system. Some more, some less, I enjoyed every game from Castle Ravenloft to Wrath of Ashardalon, Legend of Drizzt, all of them. And they all are variants on the same idea, which of course is not a bad thing. I spend a lot of time reading rulebooks, and when there's a new game in this system, I know that I already know how to play. I double check things, but breezing through a rulebook, being able to rely on a game system that I already know, it can be very refreshing. But of course, the dark side may be, well, but what if it is just the same thing again? Like I say sometimes, more of the same can be good when the same is good. And you're just experiencing the same in a different way. You're finding again the things that you already like, but with different touches. Here's the same game system, but we have new heroes, and it's fun to try those new heroes with new monsters. Whoa, zombie beholders! That is something to behold. So, maybe what I would have liked differently is the dungeon tiles, the environments, to have a little more variety. Maybe I've been spoiled by Tomb of Annihilation that has different types of environments. Some depict adventures that take place outdoors and some underground, and I like the sense of progression that comes from that. Here, well, you explore different sections of the dungeon that may be triggered in different ways. A room may have a different objective or a different description based on the scenario, but the sections of the dungeon will be more similar to one another. So there's less variety there. It's not a negative necessarily, it's just that, well, Tomb of Annihilation, again, maybe spoiled me because it was so fun to travel to different places that way. Something about the dungeon though, and I haven't compared tile by tile the tiles of Dungeons of the Mad Mage with other games in the system. It feels to me like there are more blind alleys, there are more places that lead nowhere than in previous games. Maybe it's just my impression, but there were a lot of cases in which we quote-unquote got a little bit lost. We go deep into one direction and all places that could depart from there turn out to be, well, leading nowhere. Then we had to retrace our steps. That means we are rushing to the dungeon because we don't want to be clobbered by encounters that are gonna keep hitting if we don't explore more. And then we start exploring. It's a black triangle classic. So it seemed, I don't know, that this dungeon was a little trickier that way in terms of the configuration, maybe in my experience, but it was actually fun, of course, to have that challenge and dungeons where it wasn't just wherever you go, you're gonna find where you need to go, but actually you had to work and you had the feeling of really getting lost in a treacherous underground environment. The monsters are fun. The AIs, as usual, as in previous D&D board games, are clear but effective, very simple. Frankly, that's all I need. That's all I need, that the monster moves there and attacks me. And if I add that to a lot of other thematic elements, my character's powers, the treasures, the traps, there is enough theme there. I mean, I played it with people that had never played games in the system, and they all were surprised by how much theme, how much story can emerge from a game where you just move some boxes and you roll a d20. Many cases, what you actually do in terms of material actions, that's what you do. And yet, the materials are very evocative, the mechanics feel very thematic, and definitely there is a sense of story. You get a sense that you're playing a simplified Dungeons & Dragons adventure, yes, but at the same time one with beautiful miniatures, with evocative components. You do not have the need for somebody to prepare a long adventure. You can play it out of the box. You still have a system to level up. So you have the core essence of Dungeons & Dragons without a lot of the overhead. you don't have the same tactical depth either, but of course it's just a different way to experience that type of story and adventure, and it is a way that I personally like. I think it's another fun set. Again, if there is a negative, maybe is that it's very similar in conception to previous games in the system. To me, that is also positive because that makes it easier to learn. As a new implementation, as a new performance of the system, I believe this is a pretty strong one. The monsters are fun, the environment is not super varied, but again, it has its own rewarding elements and moments. I definitely like the new heroes. So, in general, Dungeon of the Mad Mage. I don't always feel like playing Dungeons & Dragons, but when I do, chances are is a Dungeons & Dragons board game, not the real thing, and I think this is a new strong chapter in the Dungeons & Dragons board game system.